Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Desert Island Flicks, where we interrogate the cinematic psyche of individuals who, quite frankly, might be better suited to a padded room than a desert island. Today we are joined by Enshohma, a Los Angeles-based artist and internet personality, who was chaperoned to the studio today by a small army of cats. Mr. Enshohma arrives with a list of 10 films that he suggests are prime examples of his genius for an eclectic taste.
Yay.
Number 10.
Out of the polluted waters it came, to become the most fearful menace that ever threatened mankind. Feeding, growing ever more deadly on smog. Only one force dared stand up to its overpowering evil.
Godzilla!
Godzilla versus the smog monster. Will Godzilla, man's friend, be vanquished?
More than 1,600 dead have been reported, while other casualties are expected to exceed 30,000. The main storage tank of the Japan Oil Company has exploded.
Nothing man can do can stop the smog monster. Can Godzilla save the Earth from this mastodon of destruction?
Yeah, it's a very little known fact about Enshohma. He loves giant monsters in all shapes and forms. But when you ask me to do a top 10 list and ones that I would revisit over and over again, I think Godzilla vs. Hedorah is definitely the one for me. The movie really does feel like Sesame Street does ecological horror. It has a wonderful darkness to it, a somberness that you don't really see in many Godzilla movies outside maybe the original 1954, which of course is a massive classic. But I think this one captures that kind of somber nature without getting too dark and extreme like a lot of the American-made Godzilla media that tries to go overly dark. It still has kind of a childlike whimsy to it, which is something I've always appreciated about the giant monster genre. A monster movie is as good as its monster, and while Godzilla is definitely in the film and he's in the title, he's a secondary player to Hedorah. On the surface, it looks like a simple design. A walking piece of shit with two big red eyeballs. But they do give the character enough personality through both the design with those huge expressive eyes, and also just what the character it is too, because he's not Gigan, a deliberate comic book villain. Hedorah is just this weird alien thing that just shows up and is so bizarre and alien that you can't even stand next to him without suffering horrifically because he's literally living toxic waste. And there's a lot of really good direction throughout the whole movie that just really adds a sense of dreading atmosphere. Like, there's films that are apocalyptic, there's films that are post-apocalyptic. This film at times feels pre-apocalyptic. The fact that Hedorah is so toxic and dangerous that even Godzilla, the king of the monsters, the Batman and Superman for tokusatsu fans, struggles throughout this movie and gets some real nasty injuries. And Hedorah isn't really even going out of his way to be villainous. He's just that deadly and dangerous. There is honest artistry throughout the movie that keeps it visually interesting, although I think it works better in the atmosphere. Like the scene where Ken's father goes scuba diving and meets Hedorah. That sequence separated on its own would almost be a good little short horror movie, where a kid is suddenly orphaned because his father was taken out by a mysterious sea monster. There's a lot I do love about the movie. It just has a good sense of bizarre darkness to it. When I first saw this movie, it was on Christmas Eve because me and my family decided earlier that day we would go and rent movies from Blockbuster. So I rented the movie and I actually watched it late on Christmas Eve when everyone was asleep. So it's always been kind of like a magical moment when I was first introduced to that movie, and it's still something I try to revisit every December. It's a bizarre tradition, but I love the movie.
Number 9.
Jason! We're trapped!
Jason and the Argonauts.
The classic story of an epic voyage that has been told and retold since the birth of Western civilization, now presented on the screen for the first time. Pull! Pull! Till your hearts crack and your backs break! Jason and his band of Argonauts, the mightiest warriors the world of adventure has ever known, in search of the fabulous magic golden fleece.
Where will you find this miracle?
I have heard there is a tree at the end of the world, with a fleece of gold hanging in its branches. Todd Armstrong and Nancy Kovac portray the classic lovers. Jason, the man who challenges the gods. Medea, who betrays a kingdom for love. Acastus, driven by a lust for power. Hera, goddess and woman, who defies the might of Zeus, king of the gods, who unleashes his fury at rebellious mortals. Jason and the Argonauts. A search that became a legend.
Okay, so Ray Harryhausen is a whole franchise, a wonderful series of films that works better as a collective whole than as an individual piece. But I think the formula of Ray Harryhausen, Charles H. Sneer, and, oh god, the music from Bernard Herrmann, I think it truly came ahead with Jason the Argonauts in 1963. There have been many movies out there inspired by Greek myth, but as far as like the grandeur and the almost fairy tale aesthetic, not many of them have been able to capture it, yet Ray Harryhausen is probably one of the few who managed to succeed in that regard. As Brendan Tenold has smartly noted, it is the one Ray Harryhausen movie where it is still very entertaining and interesting when there are no monsters on screen. You know, Todd Armstrong is a pretty convincing Jason. Young and naive, but he's still a man's man. Nancy Kovac as Medea is such a beauty, and I can totally buy her instant friendship and romance with Jason. It's a very unorthodox take on Hercules, but Nigel Green as like an older, weathered, slightly wiser, and more self-aware Hercules is definitely an interesting take on the character. So much so that I wish we actually got a Ray Harryhausen Hercules movie. And it's very interesting. It's like a very good Shakespearean play, but one that's a little more easier to digest because it is Greek mythology. When the monsters do show up, though, they definitely are the highlight to an already great film. There is the Hydra, which is just an amazing animated character in its own right, stop motion or otherwise. But of course, everyone remembers the skeletons. Those skeletons will forever be the trademark of Ray Harryhausen. But of course, there's also Talos. Talos is portrayed in this so beautifully that it is the version of the character we go to. And with Bernard Herrmann's music, when, you know, Talos walks, even just coming to our heroes on the beach, the scope of it is amazing. They really went all stops making this movie, and it really shows. Ultimately, though, I think it is the best movie Ray Harryhausen and his friends ever made, and it is infinitely entertaining. It is classy beyond all get-go, even with the stop-motion monsters. And those stop-motion monsters are wonderful, all of them.
Number 8.
WALL-E brings memories of my brother Gabe, my youngest brother, since he definitely loves that movie a lot and he highly recommended I go see it in theaters. It's a very simple idea. Basically Buster Keaton if he was a robot in the post-apocalyptic world. Actually, that's not simple at all. I take that back. WALL-E is overly complicated. Buster Keaton, save yourself. I was chasing a bikini woman and now I'm in space. Oh, who's the white robot over there? Nice. Anyway, that was my terrible... That was Buster Keaton 1960. So WALL-E, there's a lot of animated movies I really do love. So I thought about The Incredibles. I thought about The Iron Giant. And Fantasia, too. I'll give a big shout out to Fantasia. But then I thought about it, and the one animated movie from Disney or otherwise, or Pixar in this regard, and the one that really hits me in the heart, is WALL-E from 2008. Now, the movie itself, it is a story about this one lone surviving cleanup robot that inadvertently, without knowing it, kind of saves the world long after the fact. It all begins with this unlikely friendship between Wally and Eve. And yeah, it's played a bit as a romance, but it's a very innocent and cute romance between these two creatures that are amazingly emotional. But then it takes a more basic narrative of trying to, save mankind from itself. And yet it does it in such a very interesting way because it is so far off in the future that mankind has devolved into these like little huggable man babies. And Wally, who is just not exactly a free-willed spirit, but just the right bit of oddball chaos, just comes in and suddenly the characters see their world in a whole new light. And it just kind of escalates intelligently from there. It's like even the human characters get affected with their interactions with Wally, and everything just snowballs until eventually all the characters come together to fight against a very interesting antagonist, Otto. Just the fact that it's mankind saves itself by rediscovering everything that was worth a damn in the old world, themselves and the Earth included, with the help of robots. And I think that is ultimately the fantasy. One of the reasons I think robots are so endearing as a fictional species in literature, in movies, and television. They are our creations. There are negative connotations, the Frankenstein monster gone wrong. But then there are also versions of the Frankenstein monster gone right. What if Victor Frankenstein stayed behind and actually raised the creature as a proper person? And ultimately that love returns in the form of, these robots help the humans and the humans help out the robots against Otto's little faction. But yeah, it's all done very innocently and intelligently, and it still has big things to say without getting overly political about it or overly cynical about it, which is very true to some of the more interesting, unique science fiction stories of old. This movie beautifully touches upon the kind of hopefulness of science fiction, even when it takes place in what is essentially a post-apocalyptic world or a universe in this regard. But in doing so, it's a very heartfelt movie.
Number 7.
Duel is a very good movie. It's one of those films that whenever it's on television, I will definitely sit down and watch it. And sadly, I only have the movie on DVD-R. I recorded it off TCM once. God bless TCM. At the time of this recording, they're still on cable television, but who knows what the future has for that wonderful network. David Mann, a middle-aged salesman, is driving across the desert, and he accidentally comes afoul from a huge tanker truck of mysterious origins. There is a driver inside of it, but for the most part, it's treated in such a way, filmed in such a way that you never truly see the driver. And the tanker truck, kind of takes a monstrous form in its own right. And the tanker truck just decides to stalk and hunt down David Mann across the desert. I'm usually not a big fan of movies about evil villains after an innocent victim, but this definitely has like a wonderful David and Goliath feel towards it. He's very sympathetic in that regard, and I think to an extent, he is a bit of a weenie. I will say that. Like, I like him, I sympathize with him, but he is a bit of a weenie. Especially in the scene where him and the truck driver try to help the bus. It's more comical than it is darkly comical, but there is that suspense. And of course, beautiful cinematography because it was filmed in California, around California, so I do recognize a lot of those desert areas. If you want a perfect example why stunt work matters and real footage matters, Duel is the way to go. And I think had they gone with the rear screen projection, it not only would have looked horrible, it would have dated the movie. And I love how it ends. There's this amazing race on top of the hill So he uses his own body to try to like Toro the truck off a cliff. It is so triumphant when he does finally defeat the truck, but then it has that kind of wonderful melancholy ending to it. Now he's just alone in the middle of the night on the cliff. And it kind of leaves you thinking, is it just because he's calming down from the mayhem he suffered that whole day? Or is he coming to the conclusion that, oh my God, I just murdered a man? There's no way this movie could be made today for various reasons. Again, that road rage movie with gigantic Russell Crowe is proof of that.
Number 6.
Statistically, Sanford is the safest village in the country.
Now, this big city cop.
You ever fired 2 guns whilst jumping through the air?
No.
You ever fired 1 gun whilst jumping through the air?
No.
Must learn
Is it true that there is a place in a man's head that if you shoot it, it will blow up?
how to think small.
Morning, the swans escaped.
The swans escaped.
Can you describe it to me?
About 2 foot tall.
Yep.
Long, slender neck.
That's just gonna scare it.
But in a place where not much goes on.
Watch this. Ta-da!
A whole lot is about to go down.
3 people have died in a week.
Accidents happen all the time. What makes you think it was murder?
There hasn't been a murder in 20 years. You're saying this wasn't an accident?
Not everyone's a murdering psychopath. It's high time you realise that. You and your monkey.
Did he mean me or that?
Have you ever wondered why the crime rate is so low, and yet the accident rate is so high?
Yeah.
Bust this thing wide open.
From the guys who watched every action movie ever made and created Shaun of the Dead.
You never taken a shortcut before?
When the heat is on,
Here come the fuzz.
you gotta call the Fuzz.
Gunfights, car chases.
And that's what I'm talking about.
Hot Fuzz.
Got a mustache.
I know.
Okay, so Hot Fuzz itself is a homage to the American action films that Edgar Wright, Simon Pegg, and actors like Nick Frost grew up watching. And it touches upon so many different genres to tell this story, which is ultimately get rid of all the dark, murderous conspiracies of the town, get rid of the action-filled police procedural climax, and it's ultimately this sweet little story, a kind of platonic romance, if you will, or a full-on romance if you want to listen to the commentary, between Simon Pegg's Nicholas Angel, a seasoned police constable or police officer in Britain who is so bloody good and dedicated to his job that he ends up getting transferred to a small town in Sanford. And in doing so, he ends up across a conspiracy with the town, which is very reminiscent of The Wicker Man. If you know British cinema and British entertainment, this is like a murderous row, a rogues gallery of like some of the best older actors. And they're all in here in this film. It's almost an embarrassment of riches, but it works, especially with a lot of the memorable gags. Everyone gets one good joke in there. Danny has a much more laid-back take on life, even though he does definitely want to be a better police officer. It's this yin and yang dynamic between the two of them that ultimately makes them better people in the end. That's the core of the movie. But the overall structure is brilliant, because this is basically one long setup to a fantastic punchline. The first 2 acts are all dedicated to setting up, there's a mystery they have to deal with, but then it gets that wonderful sequence. The going through the looking glass for our lead hero, where he's been defeated, the murderous conspiracy has won. He's at that really crappy cornered store trying to escape death. And then he sees the action movies, the ones that Danny Butterman had him watching on one fateful night. That's when the movie transforms into just a full-on, almost Zucker Brothers style action spoof of police films. Even the people who made the movie admit their car chase sequences suck, but it works wonderfully. It's just complete and total mayhem in that final bit, and it's very reminiscent to the Marx Brothers Duck Soup, where the movie is fairly normal throughout the majority of it, and all of a sudden we go to war with a big musical number. And you have something very similar to this, where There is like mayhem. People are being shot left and right. And of course, the big wonderful reveal is, oh, they didn't kill a single person. They just brutally injured them. And now they're still doing the paperwork. It's one of those movies that's so filled with like little comical details and character tidbits that it's worth watching over and over again. This isn't anything new. Of the Cornetto trilogy, this one's considered usually the most crowd-pleasing. Is definitely a pick-me-up movie.
Number 5.
This summer, Walt Disney Pictures presents a motion picture fantasy adventure beyond your fondest imagination. You'll be transported miraculously back to the enchanted land of Oz, that magical kingdom beloved by young and old for generations.
It's just a yellow brick.
No, Bellina, you don't understand. This was the yellow brick road.
You'll share with Dorothy Gale the shock of finding everything mysteriously changed.
What's happened to everybody?
And you'll delight with her discovery of 4 wonderful new friends who band together against a wicked queen and the dreaded Gnome King. This is the Oz you haven't seen before, and this is the Oz you'll want to visit again and again. From Walt Disney Pictures comes a whole new world of entertainment.
Why don't we just fly back to Kansas?
Return to Oz.
Fuck it. Let's put Return of Oz on the list. That movie played all the time on Disney Channel, and it underperformed at best. And granted, there is some scary bullshit in this. And that may have been more true of the original books in spirit, as well as maybe a deliberate decision from the various filmmakers, because this was the first and only movie from Walter Murch. And it thankfully one who everyone in the industry loved so much that when Disney tried to kick him off the project, it was George Lucas and other major creatives of the day who came back and got him back his job. But here's the thing, like the original Oz books, once you get past all the scary monster Muppet men and the stop-motion kaiju tyrant, there is a lot of warmth and heart into this. It's almost like you go to an alien planet with the scariest-looking creatures imaginable, you turn on the translator, and all of a sudden, oh my god, these people are all sweethearts in their own right. What the hell? True to the original Oz books, all these characters are very offbeat, very comical, but they are grotesque and bizarre. Jack Pumpkinhead, for example, out of context, that is something you do not want to see in a dark alley coming towards you. The soft voice from Jim Henson's son, and just the very endearing performance from the unique actor and puppetry they did. This movie is a smorgasbord of 1980s creature effects, too. This is some of the best looking practical creature effects Hollywood could do at the time. TikTok's a sweetheart. The Gump is a curmudgeon that you just adore. Jack Pumpkin, he's neurotic, but ultimately he's just a big kid who needs a parental figure. Judy Garland will forever be #1 Dorothy as far as history is concerned. But Fairuza Balk does a really good job as Dorothy and captures the understated bravery and intelligence of the original Dorothy Gale. Holy crap, the Gnome King, one of the all-time best children fantasy film villains ever. He's a very fearsome looking creature of stone, but he plays it very warmly. It's such a good performance. You can almost buy it that he is trying to be sincere. And then you find out that, oh yeah, he's a robber baron, he's a schemer in his own right. It's not exactly a facade, because you do feel that if the Gnome King is under the good circumstances, he could be a pretty decent person to be around. But like most tyrants, when he doesn't get his way, things go horribly well. Ultimately, I think the movie is really well done. I know there's a lot of people who love this movie, but I think they don't exactly see the heart and sweetness of the characters. Characters in the original Oz books who are utterly terrifying, but like I said, once you actually have a conversation with them, you find out it's like, oh my god, I want you to be my new Uncle Buddies. Or my new Aunt Chickens.
Number 4.
Every delightful character of L. Frank Baum's classic is now reborn. Every glorious adventure has been recaptured and painted with a rainbow. The celebration in Munchkinland. The flying monkeys. the rescue of Dorothy, the castle of the witch, the palace of Oz, and Dorothy's strange journey to the Emerald City to find the wonderful Wizard of Oz himself.
We're off to see the wizard, the wonderful Wizard of Oz. We hear he is the Wizard of Wiz, if ever a Wiz there was. If ever, oh, ever a Wiz there was, the Wizard of Oz is one because of the wonderful things he does. We're off to see the wizard, the wonderful Wizard of Oz.
This movie has a very strong place in my heart. It is my mom's all-time favorite movie, and it is definitely one of those movies I can watch over and over again with or without her. On its own, though, the 1939 Wizard of Oz film, wonderfully cast. Frank Morgan, for example. Like, yeah, the wizard himself is supposed to be a bullshitter. That's what humbug basically means. Frank Morgan just makes it so warm and lovable that you do instantly forgive him. That even when he is found out, you don't hate him too much. And it's also, not only is it like not 100% faithful to the original books, but it definitely captures the kind of humorous spirit of the original books. These characters are fantastical creatures and often scary situations, but they go about it with a nonchalant cleverness towards it all. Further improved because not only do you have a lot of these great comedy and musical stars in these roles, but I think they capture the spirit of a lot of the silly cartoon comedies at the same time. It's a very subtle gag, but it gets me it always brings a smile on my face. Where Bert Lahr's lion, Cowardly Lion, is singing the big song about becoming the king. And they make that outfit for him just from random material outside the wizard's gate. And the Tin Man just nonchalantly grabs a flower pot, hits it with the hammer, instant crown, and just puts it on with no reaction whatsoever. And it's just so beautifully timed. And it's such a great sight gag. So yeah, the movie is not only very heartwarming and very wholesome, but it has a lot of really clever humor inspired by like the kind of vaudeville attitude towards it. And it's just a really good movie. And I can see why it inspired a lot of other fantasy movies going in. It's kind of similar to King Kong. King Kong was a massive blockbuster, but nobody could really copy or imitate the success of doing a big, bombastic adventure monster movie like that, especially back in the 1930s. But then when the movie got re-released in the early 50s, 1952, which made even more money, that's when everyone got into the bandwagon. It's like, hey, now we have the technology. With The Wizard of Oz, it did really good when it first came out, but it wasn't the massive blockbuster MGM hoped it was going to be. But the re-showings of the movies over and over again and how dependable it was as a matinee, the movie eventually kind of became a staple. When the movie was starting to really gain traction with early television airings, in the 1960s, there was suddenly a flood of colorful fantasy films. So much so that even Disney himself tried to do a Wizard of Oz movie. That failed, so he made Babes of Toyland, which is a fun movie in its own right. Doesn't exactly capture the same magic. And even though I'm also a huge fan of Return of Oz, if I had to pick one or the other, I would grab both, punch the Nazi guy in the face, tell him like, no, I'm going to say both movies. That's a Sophie's Choice reference. Okay, that was a bad joke. Let me do this again. Okay, rewind, redo. Willy Wonka, forget about it. Please edit that out.
What the heck is that whistle? Number 3.
You say an invisible man. I'll show you who I am and what I am. Even the moon's frightened of me, frightened to death. The whole world's frightened to death. How do you like that, eh? I'm afraid I need this bicycle.
The Invisible Man appeals to my inner supervillain because it is so fun. Mainly because of its lead actor, Claude Rains, as Dr. Jack Griffin. We are told that he probably is a decent person, one who came up in life under rough circumstances, one who kind of had to pull himself from poverty just to become a scientist's assistant. And of course, the reason he created the invisible formula was that he could give his wife something, his fiancée, I should say, something significant for a long-term plan when they finally do get married. But then it unfortunately all goes wrong, as all great mad science stories do. So he goes off into one of the worst villages in all of turn of the century England, which is played for laughs, but at the same time, it's like, again, this movie appeals to my inner supervillain. I think we've all been in that situation where it's like, I'm trying to do my art, I'm trying to think straight, and you're surrounded by idiots, and that innkeeper and his wife are not the most supportive people with this wacky operation he's trying to do. So I don't know if he just cracked because everyone else just kept bothering him at that inn, or if that's when the chemicals finally hit, or a combination of both. The big monster reveal of what's really underneath those bandages. And when he goes on a rampage, it is one of the best rampages in all of monster movie history. I don't want to sympathize with this mass murdering psychopath, but it's fun. There are some genuine moments where you're definitely on Griffith's side, because there's the character of Kemp, the worst friend ever, who he tries to go to Arthur Kemp and make him a fellow Invisible Man and his sidekick in the ways of evil. And of course, Kemp sells him out, and he gets so pissed off that he comes back for revenge on Kemp. And the police, bless their dumb hearts, they try everything in their power to try to protect Kemp, and, with the nets and the spray paints and all that, and it doesn't work. And eventually Kemp is captured by the Invisible Man, which leads to one of the best scenes in the whole movie. First off, H.G. Wells wrote a really good novel to begin with, but the Invisible Man himself was much more of a revolutionary anti-hero, whereas here, he's just a poor guy who's become an even worse monster. He's been on the lam for who knows how long, naked in wintertime too. That's the one detail that takes me out of the movie a little bit. Not only is it a great introduction to the character when he first mysteriously enters the inn, a great first monster reveal / rampage when he goes crazy in the village, and then of course a great ending. So it's just fantastic. I think they've created a really wonderful character. You're on this crazy, mischievously murderous adventure with him from the get-go. It's a very tightly woven movie, and it is a film that just brings me joy every time I see it. But I do feel a little guilty about it because, he's a bastard.
Number 2.
Warner Brothers is proud to present the story of a guy.
Good morning. I'm here.
And his bike.
James Bond kind of stuff.
Together for the first time in their first big movie.
I meant to do that. I say we kill it. Yeah! I say we let him go.
Merry Christmas!
Pee-wee Herman is Pee-wee Herman.
Hello!
In Pee-wee's Big Adventure,
Be sure and tell him Large Marge sent ya.
Well,
Pee-wee's Big Adventure is like a lightning in a bottle type of film experience, very much like the original Ghostbusters or even Star Wars. It's a movie where all the elements, both behind the scenes and on screen, came together. Because it's not only Paul Rubens, but there was also a lot of influence from Tim Burton back when he had a love for humanity. And it shows. Phil Hartman threw in a lot of himself inside the script as well. And there's a wide variety of really great character actors for a lot of the small minor roles. And it's amazing that you would end up getting such a great movie out of an otherwise kind of gimmick character. They could have easily made this movie kind of like the Ernest movies or a lot of films where you have this weird, funny, gimmicky character, but everyone else around him is 100% normal. Pee-wee's Big Adventure exists in this kind of heightened reality, this kind of not exactly magical realism, but it's sort of like a world a kid would imagine what the adult world would be like. Like, oh, I get to live in my own house and eat Mr. T cereal on top of pancakes. And it's wonderful, too, because it has a weird sense of community because everything is kind of uniformly colorful. And of course, there's some wonderful gags that me and my brother still quote to this day. The part that I adore immensely is when Pee-wee, he's lost his bike. He's reporting it to the police. Well, you know, just this morning, Francis wanted to buy the bike. Francis! just that rampage sequence into his mansion and then the fight scene in the pool. I love the fact that Francis thought that if Pee-wee couldn't see him underwater, everything would be okay. And then suddenly the feet come down with the great Danny Elfman music. And it just cuts to Francis screaming underwater like, ah! It's just so good. It's so good. And the movie, it's just, from start to finish, almost everything is firing on cylinders. Just a really good movie. It's just perfect in my regard. From what I understand, a $7 million budget, made a lot of money. And I don't want to call it timeless, but it is nice how the movie has kind of stand the test of time, where even millennials can still appreciate it for the wackiness that it is. Just pure, colorful joy.
Number 1.
From the director of Time Bandits and Brazil, a new movie full of noise. Flying objects.
Trust me, madam. Your underwear is in good hands.
Seafood.
Hello. Is there a doctor in the fish?
Celebrities.
I'm Baron Munchausen. That sounds nasty. Is it contagious?
Compassion.
The Sultan is going to cut off my head. And?
Travel.
Now you come back here and expect me to follow you to the ends of the earth. Yes. All right.
Honor.
Have you any famous last words?
Not yet.
Not yet? Is that famous?
Gravity.
We've been dropped through the center of the world to come out on the other side.
Bull. He was full of it. The Adventures of Baron Munchausen. A true story. We've got the film to prove it.
Okay, so this is the unofficial third entry in Terry Gilliam's unofficial trilogy of movies known as the Fantasy versus Reality cycle, which starts with Time Bandits, which is definitely the movie most people love, Brazil, the most respected movie, and this film, which is the sadly overlooked Return of the Jedi, or the ugly stepchild of the three films. First movie is about a boy in his youth going on an adventure, which ends on a pretty dark note, even though it's meant to be comical. Supposedly, the same boy grows up to become the bureaucrat we see in Brazil, and the horrors of the real world solely killing this otherwise normal guy who just wants to be a better guy. But he is a schlub ultimately. And then ironically, we go to the third movie, where I don't know if the subtext was intentional, but it's interesting that Jonathan Pryce is now one of the villains of this film. And we completely changed the point of view of the lead character played by John Neville, Baron Munchausen himself, which, by the way, is a real character from classic German literature, unfortunately one who is relatively obscure outside of Germany. But now we're following the point of view from a character who is not only technically a fictional character who's entered the real world, at least in the context of this movie, which is a really clever conceit. We see the real world, the Ottoman Empire is invading this small little German village, and then suddenly a character from fiction, old and withered and possibly just a delusional old man, shows up, and in his own wacky way he ends up saving the day. It's Terry Gilliam's take on Wizard of Oz, but with all the sincerity, while still being Terry Gilliam's Monty Python styles snarky self throughout the whole movie, and it's beautiful. The special effects are all gorgeously done, mostly done in camera with beautiful model work. They have a wonderful dreamlike nature to it. And John Neville himself is great, because Baron Munchausen is not only a very heroic figure, but he's very flawed, but in a very endearing and lovable way. He gets grumpy with his kid sidekick, played by Sarah Polley. You know, he's always telling everyone off in one way or another. And the fact that he's able just to warp reality just by being very nonchalant about, you know, oh, this is the way the world works. So yeah, it's gorgeous. It's a beautiful movie that just captures that era of fantasy that it was originated from. And it's wonderfully executed. Unfortunately, because it is a very uneven mix between The Wizard of Oz and Monty Python style snarkiness, you usually get distracted when it kind of goes into those tonal shifts. But I think it works beautifully in its own regard, especially with the sequences where suddenly a comical situation is made dire because of the presence of the Grim Reaper, who is a recurring character in the movie. And that has some really wonderful nightmare sequences in it, and some of the best stuff that Terry Gilliam has ever done. There's a sequence where Baron Munchausen starts to lose hope inside the giant fish. Context, ladies and gentlemen. And he just starts playing cards, almost accepting his fate that no, he's going to live inside this giant sea monster now. And then the Grim Reaper just shows up giving out the cards like that. And it's just so wonderfully executed. And of course, not only does it have a very bombastic, action-filled climax, but that ending, oh my God, that ending is like, it's like even as a little kid, I was ready to buy it. And this movie definitely tugs at my heart. I don't know why. This movie is everything. If I got stuck on a desert island, I think this would be the movie I would keep. Okay, I'm getting a little too emotional here, though, am I?
If you start weeping, I'll laugh in your face. Okay.
Megamind is mine.